Welcome to Next Round with me, Dale McDermott.
And me, David W. Higgins.
A young Irish look at the economy, politics and society.
Covering home and abroad.
For the thinkers, the dreamers and the doers, this is Next Round. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Next Round. You have heard of MAGA, but what about MIPA? Make Ireland poor again, with Ireland's diverging policy from the US growing as the days go by, and with the Trump administration being quite hawkish. We look at what the implications of a diverging policy from the US might be, and have we forgotten how poor Ireland once was? Maybe we have. New data is also out on the percent of people who are living at home, with the CSO's latest Growing Up in Ireland survey. It says that those who were born in 1998, that 70% of them still live at home. We want to look into that report and that data set as well. And also then here in the UK, in a blow to the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves' policies, the Bank of England has cut the interest rate, but it's also cut the UK growth forecast in half this year, aiming at 0.75%, down from 1.5% that it had last year. So with that, I want to have a look at that situation as well. If you do like this podcast, please like it, please share, and please subscribe to it. We are available on all major podcasting platforms and also available on YouTube, where you can subscribe to our channel there and also see us. David, it is good to see you again, and I hope you're well.
Good to see you too, Dale. Keeping good.
So we want to start off with MIPA, which is something which I did not think might take off. It doesn't have the same ring to it that MAGA has, but I know you've been tweeting about MIPA this week. And of course, this is in the context of the growing difference between some of Ireland's policies and how congruent they are with US foreign policy and economic policy as well. So what do you mean by MIPA?
Yeah, so MIPA it describes an outcome really more so than intent. So with MAGA, it's like, oh, you want to make America great. We know the outcome. You want it to be great, and your intent aligns with it. MIPA is the idea that that our interactions with the US can be all about other issues other than the economy, and that we can kind of just forget about the economic links, or that they'll just take care of themselves. Okay, so why did I come up with this phrase? Caught my eye that on the plinth of the Dáil, one of the new SOCT MTDs, Sinead Gibney, she said the following: if Trump, quote, remains on this trajectory towards policy of ethnic cleansing, referring to Gaza, of course, then no, we cannot support the Taoiseach going to the US. So the early signals are getting out there that many of the opposition parties are not just going to have many things that they would like to be said against Donald Trump, but actually that the Taoiseach of the country should not go over to the US at all. And that we should really, kind of like people do in secondary school and high school, would just give someone the silent treatment as a form of kind of ostracization, that's what we're going to do to the US. And it's a total misread of the standing that Ireland has. And I think it's embarrassing. But I think if this kind of chorus of people are listened to, there's only one clear outcome that's going to come from it. Ireland will get poorer.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ireland, if I'm right in saying this, is the only country in the world that has a standing invite to the White House at the same time every year, which is of course, the Taoiseach, Irish Prime Minister for international listeners, gets to visit the White House, along with a delegation of officials and ministers, to press the case and to sell the country in the White House and all over the US during that week. So for such a small country, it is a real chance for the country to capitalize on its soft and diplomatic power that is quite unique to it across the world. Now, saying that, on the other side of the argument, you have people who would argue that, with an influential voice comes responsibility to use that voice to advocate for causes that you believe in and causes that have moral standing, and of course reference to the war in the Middle East and Gaza as well. So does Ireland have responsibility to use that voice?
It does. So in 2000, I think it was 16, or at least after, sorry, it would have been 17. So after Trump came in the first time, and Kenny went over and he made a speech about migration, and he used kind of not direct language against the president. We talked about how St. Patrick was a migrant. He moved from Wales over to Ireland and was the founding patron saint of Ireland. So he was trying to make the case for, okay, people move. So, saying that one person is from, people are exclusively from the place that they live, that they came from, it's just not a great piece of language. And Kenny went viral for that. And he did it by actually going to America and actually using that platform, using the eyes of the world, because it's not just Irish media or American media. You'll have British media and other media who will film these kind of world leaders who go and meet the president. It's a chance to actually use your voice towards something. But the risk is that if you say no to the president one year, it'll fall out of the calendar. The White House will be like, oh, well, okay. I mean, if you're not going to meet us this year, Trump has 3 more years. So you're not going to probably meet us the following 3 as well, because this government is also in term for 5 years, not 4 with the US, but that will crisscross with the full 4 years of Trump. So what you're basically saying is you're not going to visit there at all. Now, would you then still send ministers to other parts of the US? Like, one thing I expect to happen now is that the government is going to send more ministers than ever, I would bet, to the United States. And that's the thing you need to be doing, actually, is actually increasing your links and your interaction, your engagement with that new administration, not turning cold shoulder.
I remember actually, I think his video had like 30 million views or something, but basically Enda Kenny did a speech and he referenced that St. Patrick was the patron saint of immigrants himself, given that St. Patrick was, of course, an immigrant in his own right. But yeah, like David, I agree with you. I think I think we probably forget how we have soft power. It is soft though, and with that is, we're a small country. We're an island off the coast of Europe. We're 5 million people. The fact that we get that standing invitation, I think, to not turn up to that is something which I think would be very, very foolish and quite stupid for the government to actually deploy that as its diplomatic strategy. I think we have a duty to show up. I think like all relationships though, and if I think of Hugh Grant actually in Love Actually, when he is standing up to,
it's a bit early for Christmas, Dale. But okay.
I know, but we're going to go there. But he says, it's about the whole idea of a relationship is also saying when it's not becoming a good relationship, or that whole honesty piece is really important. So I think diplomacy is both ways. It's the positive, it's engaging, and it's also being able to constructively engage with countries who you may not agree with. There are many countries around the world who Ireland should also be vocal on as well. I mean, you look at China, you look at lots of other countries that have Iran that have really poor human rights records. Ireland has a duty in that regard as well to use that voice as well.
Yeah, unfortunately for that one, Dale, we decided to open an embassy in Iran recently, and President Higgins decided to write a pretty fawning letter to the Iranians, saying that they were both kind of seeking peace or whatever. So this is where I find that this landscape of Ireland's foreign policy and our ways of engaging with the world, and some of it just feels so lopsided. I think that kind of President Higgins' kind of mindset of, well, we're not standing with the big military powers, we do that at the UN, that kind of stuff. That's I think there's good reasons to be part of that, because look, we're a former colonial country, so we're always conscious of those things.
Well, it's one of the reasons why we won the Security Council seat as well, right? Is that like people see smaller countries see Ireland as that broker, right? That intermediary between the classical large military powers and those who are not that.
Yes, yeah, and that leads us at risk then to, well, basically turning a blind eye to what's going on in some other countries. We're trying to be a friend to everyone.
Hmm.
So, we're only really being most vocal in the most salient things. And really, our foreign policy has become basically just kind of rolled steam over. There's been a steamroller ran over it by the domestic reaction to the Israel-Gaza war. That's basically what's happened. That you've had just this kind of ferocious fight in the airwaves between Ireland and Israel that's kind of just taken over it. But just go back. So like the key point I'm making with this is, um, if you have disagreements with the Trump administration, of which there are many, and there are going to be many from this government and from the opposition, they have many things that they clearly want to say to the Trump administration too. You only doing that. You only get that message across by actually getting in the room with Trump and his people, by going over there and actually sending even more people to other parts of the US, send more people to some more of the bigger red states, ones that may think a little less of the Irish economy because the trade links aren't there. It's time to actually send more people over, not less.
Yeah, and of course, all of that is assuming that we get an invite in the first place.
Yes, we don't even have one as of today, as of
You
we're
know?
recording this, and that's, look, it's partly because they don't dish them out too early anyway. And it is, well, what's 7th of February? We've another month and 10 days to go, so not no time either. The flight prices to DC would be going up from here
Yeah,
onwards.
I don't think that's that's not on
That's
the
not the
level of
biggest worry.
priority.
It's not the
You
biggest
know.
worry. No, no.
But
Um,
but but I mean, genuinely, like this wasn't a thing since the foundation of the United States, right? This is really a thing that the first Shamrock ceremony was it Reagan?
I actually don't know who the first one was. There
I think
certainly were ones under the Reagan era.
yeah, I think it might my point there is that it wasn't like this hasn't been a forever thing, and I think there was a period of time as well where it was interrupted. I wonder, did Nixon? I'm not sure actually,
Yeah.
but I know that this isn't a guaranteed thing. It happened because, of course, the Irish American influence across U.S. politics significantly grew during the 80s, the 90s, and that affinity with Ireland was very, very clear. What I know from talking to people who are diplomats themselves and are quite close to this arena have spoken about how Ireland's influence in American politics has been dwindling, and our influence over the various caucuses in Capitol Hill. Um, there isn't that many people who are singing the Irish cause as there were 20 years ago. And
Yes.
that's a cause for concern. That is a cause for concern for how Ireland's voice is heard in the decision making arena in the US. Um, and particularly at a time when the EU is facing a potential tariff war with the US, with the idea of reshoring manufacturing, in particular pharmaceutical manufacturing, which is a high concentration in Ireland. There is a huge risk for Ireland Inc. And what has been a very successful foreign direct investment policy and industrial policy over the last 40 years has a real risk now of being severely damaged. And with that, can bring down our prosperity and how we're able to fund the various services and overall country that we have, and that we've been doing so well, running a surplus, um, as we've been doing. So it's a real risk here, David, and I'm
Yeah,
actually really
yeah, no,
concerned.
those are really, really strong points, and it reminds me of what's happened in Europe as well. So in the incoming commission, the number of Irish staffers who've gotten kind of jobs within that, to be able to really steer policy, that's down as well. So it kind of speaks to how our outreach on both sides of the Atlantic just hasn't been as strong. Now it's coming from a really high peak by getting that seat in the Security Council, by having Pascal Donoghue of a Eurogroup, by having trade commissioner at one point. Like, we've had some really, really big wins on the global stage. But the decline of the US, like, that's something which you can kind of trace back to the fact that we don't send as many immigrants to America anymore because the Irish economy has been so strong, which is ironic because we needed the immigrants to build the relationship with the US so we could actually get really good jobs and FDI, but then we no longer have big emigration to the US, so we don't actually keep the outreach as strong. And furthermore, there's other cultures and groups in the US now that are much stronger. Like the growth of the Latino population
Oh, it's
is
huge.
really
Oh,
strong.
yeah.
So you have so many different nationalities from Southern America and all around the world who've descended to the US. And all of them are going to want their National Day celebrated too. And I can certainly see a situation in the coming decades where that St. Patrick's Day buzz just isn't as strong. That in itself may not signal the end of FDI and everything else. There's very good reasons why that could continue. But, it could be a signal of a waning of their standing.
No, but we have competition, right? Like, it's a case now that we have clear competition from other countries, and to your point, David, it is a numbers game as well. Like access for Irish immigrants who, let's say, are not as skilled as others is just significantly lower, right? Like, that lottery isn't there anymore. I think it was the Donnelly visa was one visa from, I think, the early 90s that was particularly used by Irish immigrants to the US. Like, these avenues are just not there. We have seen, though, of course, in Canada, a much easier immigration system up until now to access. But in a world where borders are going back up and immigration being really scrutinized, this is a challenge.
So Dale, we'll give the bowl of shamrocks to Justin Trudeau.
Well, he won't be there.
Instead.
He won't be there.
He's on the way out, of course.
It'll be Pierre Poilievre, who likes Ireland, and I'm sure he'll be a good friend to the country.
Hope so. Yeah.
So, with that, let's shift gears because there is another piece of data which is out, which is new data from the CSO. So this is the CSO's Growing Up in Ireland survey, which says that 70% of people who are aged 25 live with their parents. So it also says fewer than 1 in 20 own their own home. 1 in 8 have emigrated. To give you a snapshot on some of these data points. Now, David, I know you wanted to talk about the accuracy of this, and also how does this data stack up to, let's say, the census?
Yeah. So this data is a little surprising. The
Why?
number of the numbers living at home, that's the main data point I'm really going to focus in on, because it is high, but it is much higher than other data releases that we've had in this realm, right? So if you go back to the census, so the census is the counting of almost everyone in the country. Everyone on census night fills it out, and particularly those who are in a household where the kid is living at home. It's usually the parents that are filling it out, and then they pass the form to their sons and daughters to fill out. So of the 25-year-olds who fill out a census, chances are, sorry, by the way, there will also be census being filled out from people who are renting as well. That happens too, who have moved out. But point being, it's a measure of almost everyone in the country. It's a very high sample of it. It's
by household.
By household, yeah. But then the Growing Up in Ireland survey it's something a little more particular. It is a cohort of young people who were born in 1998 who are being followed through the decades and are being surveyed at regular intervals, about every 5 years, and data is being pulled together on them. Now, that is not to dismiss this as being data that you can't use. There's really, really insightful data in it, and I've been in and out of lots of the different parts of this data. But the one thing that this Growing Up in Ireland survey is missing is those who didn't grow up in Ireland, because there are 25-year-olds who moved to Ireland in the years since, and crucially, anyone who in their mid-20s uproots from somewhere in Eastern Europe or Brazil or anywhere else in the world moves to Ireland, those people are very much moved out of their family home. Now, you could say that because it measures people who grow up in Ireland, that's the full experience of every stage of your life having grown up in Ireland. But actually, when you look at things like the rental market, the ability to house people in the rental market, really you do need to be looking at everyone, because those people who moved from abroad they're working jobs in our major towns and cities, and they are able to have enough money left to be able to pay rent and then pay for other things.
But they also don't have a choice, right? Like, and I think this is the piece where if you move to a country, you have to rent. At the very minimum, you have to. Now, of course, you could have supports from the States, but the vast majority of people who move here for a better life or experience will be renting privately in some capacity. But if I'm at home and, I might just have the choice I could go out, and again, if I'm on a lower paid salary every year, let's say it's taking, given let's say the Dublin market, it could be taking nearly half your net take on pay on rent, you might just choose to stay at home. Mightn't be nice, but you have that option, right? You have the flexibility to do that.
Yes. No. That I take that is quite fair. So I suppose the thing I'm trying to get to with this though is to I suppose acknowledge that yes, the numbers that are living at home are elevated. But I do think that numbers like 7 in 10, I've even seen 3/4 being used to describe this. I don't think that numbers that elevated accurately describe what's happening. See, the thing about being in your mid-20s is that it is that stage where people begin to move out, but at a gradual pace. So if people are doing master's courses, for example, and there was maybe around 10 or 20% of people in that 25 age cohort who were still in formal study, the necessity to move out may not be there whilst you are studying. The desire may not be, because you might be closer to your study than you are to where you might ultimately like to work. But also what we really see in this CSO data is that as you move through the 20s, the numbers who are still living at home by when they turn 30 is just much lower. So like when you look at so this Grown Up in Ireland survey is those who are aged 25. Then we look at the census, and this is those who are 25 to 29. So it's kind of looking across the whole group of them. The number is 33. So it's only 1 in 3 that are still living at home. So the number is much lower, considerably lower. Now, then there's actually, and I know I'm probably jumping between, is this a good thing, is this a bad thing? I'm trying to just kind of give the different data points. There's this other survey out there, and it's called the SILC Survey on Income and Living Conditions. And I see this getting brought out a fair bit too on the topic of young people living at home. And that does show an increase over the years. But that too has a quirk in it. It included people who moved home during COVID, but it's actually measured across roughly 3 years. So when you see a number, it's the 2022 value. It actually includes 21 and 20. So it includes people who moved home during COVID. So that 22 number showed about 65% of late 20s.
No, it's like I think any sort of COVID data on that is going to be kind of skewed, right?
It is, but that number also includes is people who have moved out but are still getting some financial support from home. So if your folks are give there's even a contribution and even 100 or 200 euro towards your rent, for example, that bucket that puts you into that category. And I see that regularly quoted as being, oh, those people still live at home. Some of them, most of them do, for sure, but it's counting the COVID people and it's counting the financial supports. So I guess the point to get here is that the you need to know what exact each measure includes when you are talking about it. And I just, I think that's really important to stress.
The Grown Up in Ireland survey, how many people do they survey? Do you know?
It's over 3,000.
Okay, so it's a good sample size. Okay. The one other point, of course, that I see in the stats here as well is, while yes, okay, so 70% are living at home, 73% are saving on a regular basis. So obviously that's one of the benefits of not putting most of your money into rent, is that you actually get to save a lot of it. And I'm sure then, that might go towards saving for a deposit and all that sort of stuff. Now, at the same point, though, I still think we speak on this, David, about milestone recession and the delayed milestones that result and are that come from people living at home and not being able to go out there and build relationships and do everything that comes with that.
Yeah.
So while financially might be good, but I'm sure this is contributing, if true, to the theory of milestone recession.
Oh, it does. It does. Yeah. So I suppose this is because this is kind of a topic that I have really become invested in. When I see such a difference in these data sets, I'm really keen to caution people on, well, hang on a minute, this includes different things. But look, even if you take the census number as being true and you get to your 30s, and the number for people who are, I think the number for people who are in their early 30s is something like 1 in 7, something like 14%. I'd have to just check that, but that it gets lower again. But like that is still, as I said, 1 in 7 of people in that cohort who are living with their parents. Now, those people might be on the cusp of going to buy their first place. They might have rented for a bit and then moved back with their parents for the time, and they get captured in that survey. But the other thing that's really important about the that even that 25s data, which is really at the start of your financial career, the median, I believe, salary that was coming out of it was around 29,000 euros. And what we know from people's incomes is that they will increase throughout their late 20s and into their 30s. And the average pay data that we have in Ireland, it doesn't, to me, show, at least at the average, that there is an inability to afford even very basic rent in our towns and cities. That's not to say it's not bad value for money. There is bad value for money out there in our rental markets.
Mm-hmm.
But there's going to be a cohort of people in those late 20s cohort who have actually started working, who have the income to do it, and for various kind of social reasons, they just don't. It can be as simple as to your friends say, oh, hey, I've got a room free. Do you actually want to move out of your house and come in to us? And that could come 2 years after people start working a good job. It's those kind of things that are a little more social and just take a little bit more time to work through the system.
Yeah.
Even if all the things are going well.
One of the pieces, a few other things that I've noticed from the data as well. So about 62% of people cited mostly financial reasons for why they decided to stay at home. And again, that could be like defined financial reasons. They don't think it's worth the rent that they're paying for. And you know what? They'd probably be right, given the quality of some of the housing stock in Ireland right now and the price that they're paying for it. But one of the optimistic pieces was that for those who are not homeowners, which is 19 and 20 of that cohort at 25, 80% expected to buy a home in the future, which again is a positive outlook. And one other reason why, again, people might stay at home, why they might want to save money, would be, of course, moving abroad. And in the data set as well, there was a high number of the cohort who were planning to live abroad. I think it was 5 and 6 had planned to live abroad for 12 months or more. And I believe the other piece then was for those who had emigrated, about half have said that they do plan to return to Ireland, and 30% had not decided. Let's say they, on balance, would come home. That's about 80% of people who go abroad will likely come home as well.
Yeah, and that goes back to the phrase boomerang emigration that I use to describe not just the Australians, but applies to the Canadians like yourself, Dale. You full boomeranged past Ireland.
I didn't. Yeah, but I missed my flight to get moved.
Yeah, you lad. Yeah. But
I overshot.
You said at the start of that around the home ownership aspiration, it's still really strong in Ireland because that's just really the culture that we have. But it almost speaks then to why people may actually stay in the family home for longer. They see rent as dead money, because that is so culturally Irish as well, as being reluctant to move out and actually begin paying rent, because you just see it as being a real waste of money.
I think, I mean, I debate this point because I hear it from people. I mean, rent can be dead money depending on how inflated it is, right? So I think if rent is fair because it gives you, you have the flexibility, you do not have the risk involved, and you have the flexibility and the freedom to move and to move as you like, for an equitable price, then I don't think it's dead money. I can totally see the point though when you're paying well over half of your pay packet on really mediocre shoddy accommodation. I can totally see why that's dead money, and I can totally see why you would prefer to stay at home and live in the home comforts of your family and what and I'm sure you might live in a nice home, etc. Right? So, but yes, David, I think it does speak to the point of, is this dead money? Probably at the current values, I would say yes.
Yeah. The other thing about staying at home, as you said, the comforts of home. If the meals are being cooked for you, mommy's changing the bed, why would you move out?
I mean, I can think of other reasons to move out, but won't go there.
Privacy.
Privacy. Yeah. I value my privacy. Okay. So I think very, very interesting segment there, David. I'm curious to see kind of as we go forward what the differential between those two data sets will be.
Just before we end up there, I've asked the CSO to break out their census numbers on,
great.
Is it 25, 6, 7, 8? If I could get a response on that, we'll do another segment on it, and I can tell you what that all means. And I might have more questions for them, but let's see.
Okay. Well, moving from that to gloomy news. So over here in the UK, David, again, going from Ireland, where it's you've got an abundance of money, lots of cash, Apple money is flowing. Here in the UK,
more money than sense.
Well, yeah, but at least you've money, because over here there's none. And in response to the persistent economic challenges that is facing the UK, the Bank of England this week reduced the rate by 0.25% to 4.5%, which is the third rate cut since August of last year. This is happening because there is a concern around economic activity and the need to stimulate it, and also concerns over slow growth in the UK. And also, of course, there are still some inflationary pressures as well, which I'll speak to in a moment. But basically, the Bank of England has halved GDP growth forecast for the UK for this year from 1.5% growth to just 0.75% growth, which is reflecting a pretty cautious outlook as well. So I mentioned there about the growth challenges. Also, inflation remains a concern here in the UK as well. It's projected to rise to 3.7%, which is a little bit high mid this year. Factors driving this are energy costs. With that, and also concurrently, the labour market has shown signs of easing here as well. So it is a really bit of a mixed bag here. Worries around stagflation, lack of growth, inflation rising. And with that, I know there's been commentary around the Bank of England making rate cuts, many rate cuts over the next year. I just would worry about that, especially with inflation still being persistently challenging for the UK. I'm not sure if that is very much on the cards. But I did want to make one call out here, David, which is David Cameron, former Prime Minister of the UK, was on Political Currency, which is I would say, competing podcast with ours, David, hosted by former UK Chancellor George Osborne and Ed Balls, his Labour friend. And I'm not sure if you saw, but basically David Cameron was asked about how does he feel things are going for 6 months, any advice, etc. And his big caution was about the negative feeling in the country right now. That he said he's never seen it as bad, and actually government has a real responsibility here to set the narrative and the tone of that narrative. And he feels that more or less, the government has really talked the country down to the point now where it is in a total rut, and there's a real lack of positivity to bring us back out of that. So, um, I'm sorry to have our third and final segment on this being so negative and gloomy, but it's not good.
Yeah, and I suppose that is probably the feeling I've gotten from the UK in recent times, but also from the government because they have been keen to put out this messaging of, look, we've got really bad books to balance and all of that. So there hasn't been as much positive messaging around it. I guess the challenge for me is that, well, the numbers are really bad. And
Yeah,
there really can be sometimes no getting away from it. Like, there's a bit of work that that is, when people look at the deficits in the UK. So, how much fiscal room is there, right? That's that phrase that
fiscal
the
space.
fiscal space. Yeah, yeah. I mean, in 2024, the UK's budget deficit was what, about 5%. It might
Hmm.
be lower to 4. People might remember a time back in the Irish crisis days where really you wanted your deficit to be no more than 3, and anything more than that was real danger zone. Well, being at 5 and 6 is well past that. But each year that you have a deficit, you're just adding more to your debt pile. But what also is a major problem in the UK, and I have mentioned this before, it's because the UK also runs a large current account deficit. So that's excluding the government sector. You're looking at the private sector. Is if you have a current account surplus, you're usually selling lots of goods abroad and people are buying them. Germany is a great example of that. You're getting money in. You're not
Hmm.
at risk of financial market turmoil. Britain is the opposite. They are the opposite because they are reliant on the rest of the world to kind of look favorably on them because there's more imports that are going into the UK than they are selling their own stuff. When you actually combine those deficits, it's called twin deficits. You've got two of them. I mean, in 2023, that deficit was over 10% of GDP, and this year it's going to be marginally below 8, but it's still a massive funding problem. So not only does the gilt market, the yield market, the bond market have to go out there and continually refinance and keep this large debt pile managed, there's also a financial market problem too, where the private sector is also trying to do all this. So the British pound is at real risk of continuing depreciation from this. Um, so that's another challenge that's going to be in there too.
Yeah, and of course, one of the surprises I think in the budget last year was the decision to increase employers' national insurance contributions, and that was aimed at raising, it was like £20 billion to help fill that black hole, as was constantly referenced. Um, but of course, what we saw as a result of that was so many employers across the country have just been offloading jobs. And in particular, if you look at retailers, for example, retailers like the likes of Sainsbury's, etc., huge job cuts being announced recently. 3,000, I think, from Sainsbury's, just to give you an example of that. Those are hits that are going to hit pretty poor, less economically advanced parts of the country. Um, Increasing, of course, then those who are dependent on benefits and state support. But this increase in national insurance has really unexpectedly hit jobs and prices more than expected, and of course, unemployment has risen then to 4.8%, which was 0.5% higher than previously forecast. So it is a really precarious situation, and I kind of, I mean, I don't know what to do. I suppose. Look, I mean,
I know,
fundamentally,
yeah,
all of this comes back down. Fundamentally, look, this comes back down to the absolute disaster that Brexit has been for the UK, whether they like to admit it or not. But I mean, my question is, how poor does this country have to get to realise that they shot themselves in the foot and nearly in the head back in 2016?
yeah. I felt like my first answer, Giselle, was kind of to almost repeat the problem, which with more numbers, right? And your point first
We
back
don't want more
to
numbers. We get the
I,
point.
I
It's
I
not
know,
good.
I know, because your point to me first was, everything is really negative, and then I did that classic economist thing of actually just tell
Hmm.
you exactly how negative it is,
Yes.
which some of our listeners might cop on to that. Well, I guess look how to be positive about the UK. The UK is an historic world power, for better or for worse. There are a lot of people who still look up to the UK, again for better or for worse. There's a lot of people who still trade with the UK, and the UK has a history of making things. They were the base for the Industrial Revolution, which later spread to America, actually skipped Ireland, but was was really a pivotal thing. And the UK has had a great history in professional services in the decades gone by. Spearheaded under Thatcher, they were able to really open up and get into financial markets and get into legal, accounting, all that kind of, some of it's boring stuff. You do some of that stuff, don't you? Management consulting.
It's not, I'm not boring.
Yeah, no, you're not. You're not.
Boring is the word you'd use. I wouldn't describe it as boring.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm an economist, so like that's the most boring you get. But the point is, the UK has had a history of finding a niche, finding something it's good at, and being an outperformer in it to the rest of the world. They just don't have one right now, and I don't know what it's going to be that they find.
Well, I think like the likes of life sciences is an area that I think they look to explore. The whole Oxford, Cambridge region is one which I know they want to develop. And look, I know the Chancellor's talking about growth and unlocking growth, and I mean, it was good to see the commentary around the new runway at Heathrow and all of that sort of stuff. But of course, that won't be built till 2040, 2050. We need to unlock growth now. And
the challenge I see as well is the UK needs to find something that isn't just a growth engine for the national economy, but needs something for the regional economy too. Because professional services under Thatcher was a real London-centric thing, and you have this heavy weight of GDP now that comes out of London, and very much less happens in the regions. In the years where it was agriculture, you're growing stuff in the land, you can do that in any region, it helps all the regions. Industrial Revolution, that was really spread across the regions. When I got my master's, I went over to Coventry. It was where Warwick University is. And I went to the car museum that they have in Coventry. And it's so interesting. There were thousands of Irish who emigrated to Coventry in the 50s and 60s because the car industry was booming back then. And there were really big brands at the time, and they'd loads of different factories around the place. So there could be times where it's not London-centric, where it is a real boom for the economy. It's probably not going to be cars because China is all over that, and Germany and Tesla and everything. But maybe it's in some other niche, and it's hard to say what that could be. But they could. It may not be a decade or two until they find it. It could be a hard road ahead before they do. But the UK has a history of finding it, so I hope they do.
Okay, I actually was going to interject with another negative point, but I'm not going to do that because I think that is actually a nice, positive way to end today's podcast, because that segment wasn't as positive as it could have been. But but with that, I think let's end it there, David. And thanks again to everyone for listening and watching this week. If you did like this podcast, please like it, please share it, and please subscribe to it. We're available on all major podcasting platforms. Also available on YouTube, where you can watch and listen to us there. That's all we have for this week. Thanks again, and take